I knew something was wrong the moment they handed us champagne flutes etched with "Velocity is Elegance." The leadership transition retreat at this lakeside resort looked like a Netflix production set, and our CEO Lucas was strutting around like he'd just invented clean energy. I got fired right in the middle of the conference, surrounded by artificial fog and a Coldplay remix, in front of 200 people, and they applauded. My name is Elena Morrison, and at 39, I'd spent the last 8 years turning Valcora Metrics from a scrappy data analytics startup into a $100 million powerhouse. As vice president of strategy, I'd built our predictive modeling division from 3 people in a converted storage closet into the company's primary revenue engine. I knew every line of code, every client contract, every late-night pivot that kept us afloat during the lean years. So when Lucas Henley stepped up to that ridiculous crystal podium with its LED underglow and announced my transition to pursue new opportunities, I felt like I'd been punched in the solar plexus. The polite golf claps echoed across the conference hall while I sat there, champagne glass still in my hand, watching my career dissolve in real time. Elena has been instrumental in our journey. Lucas continued, his voice carrying that practiced corporate sincerity that made my skin crawl. But as we enter this exciting new phase, we need to streamline our leadership structure. Streamline, as if 8 years of my life were excess fat to be trimmed away. Security appeared at my table before Lucas even finished his speech. Professional, apologetic, but firm. They escorted me through the side exit while the presentation continued, past tables of colleagues who suddenly found their salmon Wellington fascinating. I dragged my rolling suitcase across the gravel parking lot, the sound of my heels mixing with distant applause and the hum of presentation equipment. That's when my phone buzzed. "Ready, let's destroy him," Graham Astor. Graham Astor owned 12% of Valcora Metrics and had the kind of old money that came with lake houses and congressional connections. I'd worked with him on the board level for 3 years, but we'd never exchanged personal messages. The text felt like a lifeline thrown into deep water. 20 minutes later, I found myself in a cedar-lined cabin on the resort property, still in my conference dress and heels, sitting across from a man who could buy and sell companies like mine before breakfast. Graham looked exactly like Central Casting would order for distinguished investor, silver-haired, wearing a sweater that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, with the kind of calm intensity that suggested he'd been planning this conversation for months. "You know there's something rotten here," he said without preamble, sliding a manila folder across the rough-hewn table. "Lucas has been cooking the books, and you're the only person left who knows enough to prove it." I opened the folder and felt my blood pressure spike. Internal financial reports, development timelines, product roadmaps, all with subtle but significant discrepancies from the versions I'd seen in leadership meetings. Revenue projections inflated by 30%. Development costs mysteriously reduced. Most damning, product launches scheduled for Q2 that I knew for certain were still in early testing phases. "Where did you get this?" "I have friends on the board. People are starting to ask questions." Graham leaned back, his fingers steepled. "Lucas fired you because you're the one person who could spot the inconsistencies. You built half these systems. You know where the bodies are buried." I set down the papers, my mind racing. Why come to me? You have board seats, connections, resources I don't have. Because you're motivated now. And because you're the only one who understands the technical side well enough to build an airtight case. He paused, studying my face. Also, frankly, because you're angry. Angry people are thorough. He wasn't wrong. I was angry, furious, actually, but not just about the firing. I was furious about being erased, about watching someone take credit for work that had consumed years of my life. I was furious about sitting in that conference hall, listening to Lucas talk about new directions, while presenting strategies I'd developed 6 months ago. "What exactly are you proposing?" Graham smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. "We're going to prove Lucas Henley is a fraud, and we're going to do it in a way that ensures he never works in this industry again." Over the next hour, Graham laid out what he suspected Lucas had been systematically inflating company valuations by presenting fictional products to investors, manipulating development timelines to hide cost overruns, and taking credit for innovations developed by teams he'd subsequently fired. The masterstroke was something called CoronaEdge, a predictive analytics platform that appeared in every investor presentation and board report, but, according to Graham's sources, didn't actually exist. The next funding round is in 6 weeks. Graham explained, Lucas is asking for $40 million based largely on CoronaEdge's projected revenue. If we can prove it's vapor, the whole house of cards collapses. I walked back to my car in the gathering dusk, the folder tucked under my arm like contraband. Part of me wanted to drive straight home, update my LinkedIn profile, and pretend this conversation never happened. But as I sat in the driver's seat, scrolling through 3 years of text messages from my former team, another part of me, the part that had built something beautiful and watched it get stolen, started planning. My first call was to Ava Reeves, my former assistant who'd somehow survived the purge. Ava was 26, brilliant, and had the kind of methodical attention to detail that made her invaluable for this kind of investigation. She was also still on the inside. Elena. Ava's voice was hushed when she answered, Are you okay? What happened today was insane. Can you talk privately? Give me 5 minutes. When she called back, she was in her car. They cleaned out your office an hour after the announcement. It was there to wipe your access before you even left the building. But Elena, there's something weird going on with your files. What do you mean? Your name's been stripped from development documents going back 2 years. Projects you led are suddenly attributed to Lucas or Mark. Mark Sullivan was Lucas's deputy, a competent but unimaginative manager who'd never had an original idea in his life. And there are product specifications in the system for things I've never heard of, such as CoronaEdge, for one. According to the internal docs, we launched it 6 months ago, but I've never seen any development tickets, test reports, nothing. It's like it materialized out of thin air. This was better than I'd hoped. If Ava was noticing discrepancies from her level, the problems ran deeper than Graham had suspected. I need you to be very careful, I told her. But if you happen to come across any inconsistencies in project documentation, maybe save copies to your personal drive. Just in case. Elena, what are you planning? I'm planning to get our company back. Over the next 3 weeks, Ava became my inside source, carefully documenting the growing list of fictional achievements Lucas was attributing to himself and his inner circle. She discovered email chains discussing CoronaEdge as if it were a functioning product, complete with fake user metrics and fabricated client testimonials. More disturbing, she found evidence that Lucas had been systematically contacting former employees, offering them consulting contracts with non-disclosure agreements that essentially bought their silence about their actual contributions to company projects. Meanwhile, I started reaching out to former colleagues who'd been quietly pushed out over the past 2 years. What I discovered was a pattern of strategic eliminations. Every departure had removed someone who knew too much about specific projects or had questioned Lucas's increasingly aggressive timelines and revenue projections. Sarah Kim, who'd been restructured out 6 months earlier, told me about a presentation deck she'd prepared for the board that had later appeared with completely different metrics and Lucas's name as the primary author. David Martinez, laid off in December, described discovering that his proprietary algorithm for customer behavior prediction had been renamed and was being marketed as a Lucas Henley innovation. The most damning conversation was with Jennifer Walsh, our former head of product development. Jennifer had been fired 3 months ago, officially for cultural misalignment. When I called her, she laughed bitterly. Elena, I've been waiting for this call. Lucas offered me $50,000 to sign an NDA that would have prevented me from ever discussing my work at Valcora. When I refused, suddenly I was a culture problem. What specifically was he trying to hide? CoronaEdge, for starters. The entire project was my concept, my initial architecture, my team's development work. We got about 60% through the prototype phase before Lucas pulled the plug, saying it wasn't commercially viable. Then 2 months later, he's presenting it to investors as our flagship product. Jennifer paused. Elena, There is no Krona edge. What exists is a broken prototype that crashes every time you try to process more than 1,000 data points. Do you have documentation? Everything. Development logs, my original proposal, email chains showing Lucas's concerns about viability, even the final test results that proved it couldn't scale. I kept copies because I knew something like this might happen. By the end of week 3, I had enough evidence to destroy Lucas's credibility. But Graham pushed for something more theatrical. It's not enough to prove he's a liar, he said during one of our coffee meetings. We need to catch him in the act of lying. We need him to commit fraud in real time, on camera. That's when we invented Nexuratech. Nexuratech existed only as a website, a corporate address at a co-working space, and 2 business cards Graham had printed at Kinko's. Officially, we were a mid-stage startup looking for strategic partnerships in the predictive analytics space. Unofficially, we were a honey trap designed to make Lucas Henley commit securities fraud on a recorded video call. Graham reached out to Lucas through mutual connections, positioning Nexuratech as a potential acquisition target that was specifically interested in Valcora's advanced analytics capabilities. Within 48 hours, Lucas had personally called to schedule a presentation meeting. He's so eager it's almost sad, Graham reported after hanging up. He wants to do a full product demo next Tuesday, specifically mentioned Krona Edge as the centerpiece of their offering. I spent the weekend preparing for what might be the most important performance of my career. We'd rented a small office space for the day, complete with a professional backdrop and multiple camera angles. Graham would play the role of Nexuratech's CEO, while I'd be the technical advisor, asking detailed questions about implementation and scalability. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzling, which felt appropriately noir for what we were about to do. Lucas joined the call precisely on time, looking confident and polished in a way that made my teeth clench. He'd clearly prepared for this, with a slide deck that featured sleek graphics and impressive-looking charts. "Gentlemen, thank you for your interest in Valcora," he began, and I had to mute my microphone to keep from laughing at being called a gentleman. "I'm excited to show you some truly revolutionary work we've been doing in predictive analytics." For the first 20 minutes, Lucas presented legitimate products and services, things my team and I had actually built. But then he clicked to a slide labeled Krona Edge Next Generation Behavioral Prediction. And my pulse quickened. "This is our flagship innovation," Lucas said, his voice taking on the practiced enthusiasm of a seasoned salesman. Krona Edge represents 3 years of development and over $5 million in R&D investment. It's currently processing data for Fortune 500 clients and generating recurring revenue of approximately $2 million per quarter. Graham leaned forward, playing his part perfectly. "Impressive numbers. Can you walk us through the technical architecture?" What followed was 20 minutes of pure fiction, delivered with complete confidence. Lucas described processing capabilities that didn't exist, integration features that were technically impossible, and client success stories that were entirely fabricated. He claimed Krona Edge could process real-time behavioral data from multiple sources simultaneously, predict customer decisions with 93% accuracy, and integrate seamlessly with any existing CRM system. "We actually have a live demo environment," Lucas continued. "I can show you the interface in real time." This was where his performance became truly impressive. In a horrifying way, Lucas shared his screen and navigated to what appeared to be a fully functional Krona Edge dashboard, complete with real-time data feeds and interactive analytics tools. It looked professional, sophisticated, and entirely convincing. Unfortunately for Lucas, I recognized the interface. It was a modified version of DataViz Pro, a third-party analytics platform we'd been evaluating 6 months earlier. He'd simply renamed the product, changed the color scheme, and uploaded some sample datasets. The real-time feeds were actually historical data from our existing client base, reformatted and relabeled. "This is remarkable," I said, finally unmuting my microphone. "The processing speed looks exceptional. What's the maximum data throughput you've achieved in production?" Lucas didn't hesitate. "We've successfully processed up to 50 million data points per minute during peak usage periods. The system scales automatically based on demand." I glanced at Graham, who gave me an almost imperceptible nod. We had him. DataViz Pro's maximum throughput was about 2 million data points per minute, and that was under ideal conditions. Lucas had just claimed his renamed demo could handle 25 times that volume. Fascinating, Graham said. And you mentioned Fortune 500 clients. Could you share any specific case studies? Lucas launched into detailed stories about helping major retailers optimize their customer engagement strategies, complete with specific percentage improvements and revenue increases. He named companies, described implementation timelines, and provided metrics that would have been impressive if any of them were true. After the call ended, Graham and I sat in stunned silence for several minutes. We'd expected Lucas to exaggerate or embellish, but what we'd just witnessed was comprehensive, systematic fraud. He hadn't just lied about Krona Edge's capabilities, he'd created an entire fictional narrative around it, complete with fake clients, fabricated success metrics, and a demo environment designed to deceive potential investors. How long do you think he's been doing this? Graham asked. Probably since the day he realized the real product wasn't going to work. I replied. The question is, how many people has he already fooled? The answer, as it turned out, was quite a few. Over the next week, Ava uncovered email chains showing that Lucas had been using variations of the same presentation to court investors, potential acquirers, and strategic partners for months. He'd apparently raised over $8 million in a recent funding round based largely on Krona Edge's projected revenue potential. That's when I decided it was time to bring in outside help. Marla Jensen was an investigative reporter for the Financial Guardian, known for her ability to unravel complex corporate fraud cases. I'd followed her work for years, particularly her series on startup valuation manipulation that had led to several high-profile SEC investigations. If anyone could help us turn our evidence into public accountability, it was Marla. I reached out through LinkedIn with a carefully worded message about significant concerns regarding financial reporting irregularities at a prominent analytics firm. Marla responded within hours, suggesting we meet for coffee. The Financial Guardian's offices occupied 3 floors of a converted warehouse in the Arts District, all exposed brick and open workspaces that hummed with the energy of deadlines and breaking news. Marla met me in a small conference room lined with awards and framed front pages from major stories she'd broken. Elena Morrison, she said, shaking my hand with the firm grip of someone accustomed to dealing with nervous sources. I've been following Valcora metrics since their Series B funding. Impressive growth trajectory. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. I spent the next 2 hours laying out everything we'd discovered, starting with my abrupt termination and ending with the recorded video call where Lucas had committed what amounted to securities fraud in real time. Marla took notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally asking clarifying questions but otherwise letting me tell the story chronologically. When I finished, she set down her pen and studied me for a moment. This is explosive, but I need to verify everything independently. Corporate fraud allegations require multiple sources and documentation that can withstand legal scrutiny. I understand. How can I help? I'll need to speak with your former colleagues, review the technical documentation, and ideally get someone currently inside the company to confirm the discrepancies. Marla paused. Are you prepared for the fallout? Lucas Henley has connections and resources. He's not going to take this quietly. I'm prepared. And you're sure about your motivations? This isn't just about revenge for being fired. I considered the question seriously. Was this about revenge? Partly. Yes. But it was also about something larger, about the integrity of the work we'd done, about the employees who'd been silenced and erased, about the investors and clients who deserved to know what they were actually buying. It's about the truth, I said finally. Lucas has been stealing credit for other people's work while selling investors and clients products that don't exist. That's not just unfair, it's criminal. Marla nodded. Give me 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks were among the longest of my life. I tried to maintain normal routines, job searching, networking events, the gym, but my mind kept returning to the investigation. Meanwhile, Ava reported increasing tension at the office, with Lucas holding more frequent all-hands meetings about protecting company confidentiality and maintaining team loyalty during transitions. He's spooked, she told me during one of our carefully scheduled phone calls. Yesterday, he had IT run a full audit of employee email and file access. They're looking for any unusual downloading or external sharing activity. Are you safe? I think so. I've been careful about when and how I access sensitive files. But Elena, there's something else. Lucas just announced another round of layoffs. 15 people, including most of the senior engineers who worked on the original Krona Edge prototype. The timing wasn't coincidental. Lucas was systematically removing anyone who could contradict his fictional narrative. But what he didn't realize was that we'd already gathered enough evidence to expose him. And eliminating witnesses after the fact would only make his eventual downfall more dramatic. Marla called me on a Thursday morning with news that made my coffee go cold. We're running the story Monday, she said. Front page, above the fold. Valcora metrics and the $30 million ghost product. My editor is calling it one of the most comprehensive corporate fraud cases we've seen this year. 30 million. That's our conservative estimate of how much money Lucas has raised or spent based on Krona Edge claims. Could be higher, we're still tracking down all the investor presentations and client contracts. What happens next? Lucas will try to discredit the story and probably blame former employees for spreading false information. The SEC will likely open an investigation. And you should prepare for Lucas to come after you personally. Men like him don't go down quietly. She was right. The story published Monday morning at 6 a.m. Eastern, and my phone started ringing 20 minutes later. Lucas had somehow gotten my personal number and was calling repeatedly, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. Elena, we need to talk. There are some serious misunderstandings here that I can clear up. This is going to hurt everyone: employees, investors, clients. We can fix this privately. Then, Elena, I don't know what you think you're accomplishing, but you're destroying something we built together. This isn't just about me, you're hurting innocent people. Finally, Elena, I trusted you. We were partners. How could you betray that trust over a simple misunderstanding? Call me back. We can work this out. I didn't call back. Instead, I forwarded the voicemails to Marla and Graham, then turned off my phone and went for a very long run. By the time I got home, the story had exploded across financial news websites and social media. Krona Edgegate was trending on Twitter, with a mixture of outrage from investors, schadenfreude from competitors, and sympathy from fellow startup employees who'd experienced similar betrayals. But Lucas wasn't finished. That afternoon, a story appeared on a lesser-known financial blog claiming that I had been terminated from Valcora for inappropriate use of company resources and attempted embezzlement of project funds. The story, clearly planted by Lucas or his PR team, painted me as a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge through false accusations. The allegations were easily disproven. I'd never had access to company funds, and my departure package had included a clean separation letter. But the strategy was obvious. Lucas was trying to shift the narrative from corporate fraud to workplace revenge, betting that people would be more inclined to believe a powerful CEO than a recently fired executive. He'd underestimated both my preparation and Graham's resources. Within hours, Graham's legal team had issued cease and desist letters to the blog and demanded retractions. More importantly, they'd prepared a comprehensive response that included financial records proving the embezzlement claims were impossible. Email chains showing Lucas's attempts to buy former employees' silence, and sworn affidavits from multiple witnesses. But the real blow came from an unexpected source: Valcora's own board of directors. I learned later that Graham had been working behind the scenes for weeks, building support among other major investors and board members. The Financial Guardian story had been the final catalyst, but the groundwork had been laid much earlier. By Tuesday evening, 3 board members had publicly called for Lucas's resignation, and 2 major investors had threatened to pull their funding if he remained as CEO. Lucas called an emergency board meeting for Thursday morning, clearly hoping to rally support and discredit the mounting accusations. According to my sources, he'd prepared a comprehensive presentation defending his leadership and attacking the credibility of his accusers. He never got the chance to give it. I arrived at Valcora's offices at 9:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the board meeting was scheduled to begin. I'd dressed carefully conservative suit, minimal jewelry, the kind of professional appearance that conveyed competence and credibility. In my briefcase were 3 years of documentation, email chains, development logs, financial records, and sworn statements from former employees. The security guard at the front desk looked confused when I approached. "Ms. Morrison," I thought, "aren't you no longer with the company?" "I'm here for the board meeting," I said calmly. "Mr. Astor asked me to present some technical information." Which was true. In a way, Graham had officially invited me as an expert witness to address questions about Krona Edge's development history and current capabilities. It was perfectly legal, though I suspect Lucas would have found it highly objectionable if he'd known in advance. The boardroom was exactly as I remembered, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a polished conference table that could seat 20, and walls lined with awards and recognition plaques from Valcora's better days. Lucas sat at the head of the table, flanked by his deputy Mark and the company's general counsel. He looked tired but defiant. Like a general preparing for a siege he believed he could win. His expression changed dramatically when I walked through the door. "What is she doing here?" Lucas stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward. "She doesn't work here anymore. She has no right to be in this meeting." Graham, seated at the opposite end of the table, didn't look up from his notes. "I invited Ms. Morrison to provide technical clarification on some of the issues we'll be discussing. As the architect of several key systems, her insights seem relevant." "This is ridiculous," Lucas said, turning to the other board members. "She's a disgruntled former employee who's been spreading lies to the press. Anything she says will be biased and unreliable." "Then you should have no trouble refuting her statements with facts," said Margaret Torres, the board's longest-serving independent member. "Please sit down. Lucas, let's hear what she has to say." I'd rehearsed this moment for weeks, but standing in that room with 8 sets of eyes on me, I felt the weight of everything that had led to this point. These next 30 minutes would determine not just Lucas's fate, but the future of a company that dozens of talented people had worked to build. "Thank you for allowing me to speak," I began, setting my briefcase on the table and removing a thick folder. "I'm here to address serious concerns about product development claims and financial reporting that affect the company's integrity and investor relationships." For the next 20 minutes, I methodically dismantled Lucas's fictional empire. I presented the original Krona Edge development documents, showing how a promising but ultimately unsuccessful prototype had been transformed into a flagship product through creative documentation and outright fabrication. I played excerpts from the recorded Tech call, highlighting Lucas's specific false claims about processing capabilities and client relationships. Most damning, I revealed the metadata analysis that Jennifer Walsh had provided, proving that key financial documents had been altered months after their supposed creation dates, with Lucas's computer account listed as the modifier. "The pattern is clear," I concluded. "Over the past 18 months, Mr. Henley has systematically misrepresented non-functional prototypes as market-ready products, fabricated client relationships to support revenue projections, and claimed credit for innovations developed by teams he subsequently fired to eliminate potential contradictions." Lucas had grown increasingly agitated during my presentation, occasionally trying to interrupt with objections that Margaret Torres firmly shut down. When I finished, he stood up again, his face flushed with anger or embarrassment. "This is character assassination," he said, his voice higher than usual. "Elena Morrison was terminated for cause, and now she's trying to destroy this company out of spite. Every product I've presented to this board has been based on good faith projections and industry standard development timelines." "What about Krona Edge?" Graham asked quietly. "Can you demonstrate its current functionality for the board?" "That's not. The demo environment isn't set up for." "Because it doesn't exist," I said. "The demo you showed Tech was a renamed third-party platform with sample data, Corona Edge was discontinued 8 months ago when testing proved it couldn't handle real-world data volumes. That's a lie. Margaret Torres held up her hand for silence. Mr. Henley, these are serious allegations that require serious responses. Do you have documentation proving Corona Edge's current operational status? Lucas looked around the table, searching for support from board members who were suddenly finding their notebooks very interesting. Mark, his supposed ally, hadn't said a word since I'd entered the room. I'll need time to gather the technical specifications, Lucas said finally. The development team can provide detailed reports on current functionality. What development team? I asked. You laid off the 3 senior engineers who worked on Corona Edge last week. The current technical staff has never seen the actual code. That's when I knew we had him. Lucas's shoulders sagged slightly. And for the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely defeated. The lies had finally become too complex to maintain, the fictional narrative too elaborate to defend. The board voted to terminate Lucas Henley's employment immediately, effective that day. They also voted to launch a comprehensive internal audit of all financial reporting and product development claims, hire an external firm to review investor communications, and cooperate fully with any regulatory investigations. Margaret Torres asked if I would consider serving as interim CEO while they searched for permanent leadership. I declined, not because I didn't want the power or the vindication, but because the point had never been about replacing Lucas. The point had been about truth, accountability, and ensuring that the talented people who'd built something meaningful weren't erased from its history. Instead, I accepted a consulting role to help untangle the mess Lucas had created. Over the next 3 months, I worked with forensic accountants, SEC investigators, and a new management team to separate reality from fiction in Valcora's operations. We discovered millions in misallocated funds, dozens of fabricated client relationships, and a web of financial projections that bore no resemblance to actual business performance. The real tragedy was how much genuine innovation had been obscured by Lucas's fictional additions. Valcora had developed some genuinely impressive technologies and built real relationships with significant clients. But those achievements had been overshadowed by phantom products and imaginary capabilities that made the entire company look fraudulent. During my investigation, I also uncovered something that made me laugh despite everything Lucas had tried to claim ownership of a machine learning algorithm I'd developed in graduate school, 3 years before I'd even joined Valcora. He'd filed patent applications listing himself as the primary inventor, apparently unaware that academic publication records would make such claims obviously false. We're not erasing him, I told Ava one afternoon as we reviewed employment records in my temporary office. We're writing history accurately. Ava looked up from her laptop, where she was cataloging the real versus claimed achievements of various company projects. What do you mean? Lucas wanted to be remembered as a visionary leader who built something extraordinary. And maybe he could have been, if he'd been content with the truth. I gestured at the stacks of documentation surrounding us. Instead, he'll be remembered as a cautionary tale about what happens when ambition becomes detached from reality. 6 months after that board meeting, Valcora Metrics was acquired by a larger analytics firm for a fair but significantly reduced valuation. Most of the talented engineers and developers found positions with the acquiring company. Lucas Henley settled with the SEC for a substantial fine and a 5-year ban from serving as an officer or director of any public company. I started my own consulting firm, specializing in helping companies audit their product development claims and ensure accurate representation to investors. It's satisfying work. And occasionally, I get to prevent the kind of systematic deception that Lucas perpetrated. But the most satisfying outcome was something much simpler. When the acquiring company published Valcora's technical assets and patent portfolio, they correctly attributed each innovation to its actual creators. Jennifer Walsh was listed as the inventor of the customer behavior prediction algorithm. Sarah Kim got credit for the client engagement optimization system. My graduate school machine learning work was properly cited in several patent applications. The truth, as it turned out, was far more impressive than any fiction Lucas could have invented. We'd built something real, something valuable, something that would outlast any individual ego or career ambition. And sometimes, that's the best revenge of all, letting history remember exactly what happened and who actually did the work.